All right. Okay, everybody, in the interest of time, I think we'll get started. Welcome back. We have an exciting program today, and it is my real pleasure to introduce to you Sally Mirell, who works for Here Be Dragons, which is a specialized production studio that supports creative innovations in VR, AR, and other forms of spherical filmmaking. They use custom-built tools and technology to create original immersive experiences. They co-produce short-form commercials, music videos, feature films, theater, and play in the photography and fine arts spaces as well. They have won a lot of awards, including Emmys, a Cannes Lion Award, Palme d'Or, Grammys, Webbies, et cetera, et cetera. They're based in LA. And Sally is a staff production supervisor. He oversees live action VR 360 experiences. He also crafts production approaches for the company's VR, MR, and AR experiences. He has managed over a dozen projects since he has been working for the company. And he's also been responsible for designing, programming, and installing VR art exhibits at the Whitney Museum and the Annenberg Space for Photography. So he's done a lot of really cool stuff. He's a native of Los Angeles, where he lives right now. He received his master's degree in comm and his undergrad degree in comm in 2011. And my former TA from 2011. So, welcome, Sally, back to the farm.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Halloween. So, I'm Solly. I work at Here Be Dragons. I'm production supervisor. I've been working there for about a year and a half. As Ann said, I've managed over a dozen projects since I've been there that run the gamut from 360 video to art installations to other pieces of content that are incorporated into game engine environments. I can talk all of that terminology but the real question is VR mainstream or is it a fad? Because I don't think it's reached market penetration yet. And naturally, no talk about VR would be complete without talking about AR and MR, the cousins, the kind of parallel paths for it. So let's see, VR. Who here has donned a VR headset before? All right, that's a good chunk. Anyone own a VR headset? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, that's actually a lot higher than I normally see. Who has an AR app on their phone right now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, that's also, relatively high compared to most people. So we're at the beginning of this wave, and it's goofy, it's awkward, it's messy, it's imperfect. This is a prime example. And this is just now. Imagine when you had headsets that were a lot bigger, heavier, clunkier, could do serious damage. So we look absurd from the outside, but frankly, we don't care because it's this interesting world where we get to feel empowered by seeing these visuals, by experiencing these moments that other people around us cannot do. I will admit that when I first started doing it, when I first started working for the company, I would do QC on content, and when I was at my sister's law school graduation, I went to a hotel near the back of the kitchen to wear this thing because I didn't want to be seen in the main lobby with people looking at me gawking and pointing. But I still wouldn't watch it at a plane or at an airport, but that's primarily because I don't want my wallet stolen. But I have no shame whatsoever, and I think that helps, especially when you're working in entertainment. So this latest resurgence of VR started in 2014. I started getting into it at about that same time, looking at news. I follow a lot of tech blogs. I did some virtual human interaction studies here when I was an undergrad and a master's student. If any of you have taken any classes with Professor Bailenson, he is outstanding. He is one of the foremost authorities when it comes to VR. And at that same time in 2014, Facebook bought Oculus. So the term VR became part of the cultural zeitgeist at that time. And it's really emerged into the mainstream in terms of consciousness. I can't necessarily speak to the market aspects, but to the consciousness. So these two examples over here on the left is Carne y Arena. It's a piece that was directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu, and it depicts this group of migrants and what it's like to be stopped by Customs and Border Patrol agents. It was unveiled at the Cannes Film Festival. It currently is on exhibition at LACMA in LA. It's a really interesting experience. I've done it myself. Great example of location-based entertainment. LBE is just the abbreviation for it. And it's pertinent enough to have won an Oscar. It just won an honorary Oscar. So for how much it's, for how compelling it is. The other piece alongside it to the right is Pearl. This was directed by Patrick Osborne. He won an Oscar for the animated short film Feast that played ahead of the movie Big Hero 6. It was about a little dog who's kind of running around on the floor, playing, having fun. Pearl is his first VR story that depicts a father and a daughter and a car and a road trip, and it's a really beautiful piece. I have it on display for you guys to check out later. By the way, I have tons of demos. If you have any questions about demos, I'm happy to answer, and we'll allot enough time for people to get at least one demo per person. But fundamentally, so VR has a lot of overlap with animation and VFX houses, but the language is very different. And I wanted to introduce this language of VR to you so that we all understand exactly what each other are saying, and that can kind of help guide the conversation both inside of this seminar and then outside when you're talking with other people about the medium. So let's jump into it real quick. At its basic level, VR is the use of computer technology to create a simulated environment. You enter a virtual world with the use of a head-mounted display. So I'm sure that's the HoloLens going around over there, the Oculus Rift over here. So inside of the screens on that head-mounted display, they usually take up your entire field of view if it's a virtual reality experience. You couple that with spatialized audio, so audio that's being directionally placed, and then you really achieve a powerful experience with those two elements combined. You don't even need haptics, you don't even need taste, you don't even need touch. With just two senses alone, provided that you have all five senses, it's extraordinarily compelling. So 360 video, that's the act of just creating video that is spherical. Instead of doing a traditional 16:9, as you see this aspect ratio, it's taking cameras and shooting them all around you, either at once, or you can do it in different passes. Shooting it all at once is called omnidirectional. Shooting it in passes is called nodal. Then there are a lot of different metrics that we gauge immersion by. So 3 of them are engagement. How does a user connect emotionally to a location, to a story, to characters? Presence, what's done to explore the surroundings. Keep in mind that location, more so than in a regular film, is actually a character inside of VR, and that's how we always consider it. What are you looking at? What's surrounding you? What's to the left, right, behind you? Why are you there? That's a question that we always ask ourselves when we're coming up with these experiences. And then agency, your capacity to act within that environment and influence the outcome. So those are 3 different metrics that we guide just how immersive a particular experience is. So then, as I mentioned on the first slide, we are also talking about our cousins from the VR industry. So augmented reality, mixed reality. Augmented reality, simply enough, the overlation of information on top of your existing field of view. Any of you use Snapchat? That's augmented reality. Any of you pointed like Google Street View? Yep, that's augmented reality. So then mixed reality is the newest term, and for a while people were trying to figure out what it means. I define it as what you see here, AR objects, virtual objects that are contextually aware of their surroundings. So has anyone seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Okay. So when the animations are interacting with the human characters, and when you start to see what their actions have on those human characters, if Jessica Rabbit is pulling Bob Hoskins' tie, that's an example of what a mixed reality experience would be, provided, of course, you are using an electronic device to render out that scene, to portray that environment. So So with this, 3DOF versus 6DOF, this is how we describe different types of VR experiences. So 3DOF, DOF standing for degrees of freedom. So on the top row, you have the 3 degrees of freedom. Imagine your head is at a fixed pivot point. So you can either rotate left, right, go up, down, or kind of turn to the side. Meanwhile, 6DOF allows you to start moving around in your space. You're not stationary from a fixed perspective. Even if the camera's moving and it's moving along a track, you're still in that fixed perspective. Versus 6DOF, you're allowed to explore the environment. So a good example is a 360 video from this angle is pretty bad because I've got nothing behind me. But I can go like this as a 3DOF experience. But if I start to move around and start going into the tables and kind of mixing amongst everyone here, that's more of a 6DOF experience. That's more exploratory, and it's significantly harder to pull off, but it adds to the sense of immersion. So a very, very brief history. We've had many iterations of VR. This is not the first time. In the 50s, we had the Sensorama. In 66, Ivan Sutherland, who's also called the father of computer graphics, developed one of the first HMDs, and it's not that fun to look at, but at least it worked. In the 1980s, Jaron Lanier, coming from Atari, started VPL, and that was the first company to sell VR goggles and gloves down here. And then this is the Virtual Boy, for those of you who can remember. So there are a lot of limitations to these original headsets. There's latency, and that's how long it takes for a movement to be tracked and then for the corresponding image to be directed toward your eye. There's color spectrum, interactivity, the tethered cables, the computing power, and the weight. So what led us to this new resurgence of VR? There are a couple factors. There's price. There's computing power, especially the computing power present in GPUs, much more so than CPUs. There's also a surge of interest that was led by social media, because Oculus Rift was actually a Kickstarter project that then gained a tremendous amount of momentum and then a huge buy from Facebook. So let's take a look at the high-end headsets we have available today. We have, from kind of top left to bottom right, the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, the PlayStation VR, the Hololens, which I brought with me. I brought both the Hololens and the Oculus Rift with me. And then the bottom right, you have the Samsung Windows mixed reality headset. So what makes these high-end? The quality of the LCDs, the pixel resolution, how immersive you can get. You can end up doing a lot of 6DOF experiences with this. So you can start moving amongst different objects instead of looking at a story from a fixed perspective. But it also comes with a premium price tag. So a lot of these devices on the top row, you have to pair it with a high-end gaming computer. So you're looking at $1,300 at the minimum to buy in. Usually you'll get about $1,500, $1,600, and it certainly scales up from there. The PlayStation VR pairs with the PS4, and so the combo there is about $600. All of these prices, not including tax, by the way, so just keep that in mind. HoloLens here is a $3,000 headset, and that's because it's an entire computer built inside of a headband. It's really outstanding. It's probably one of the best examples of future tech that I've ever come across, but it's got a limited market share. It's only sold for business and developer purposes, and instead a lot of the findings and the use cases for it have been translated into this mixed reality headset that is wired to a computer. The nice thing about the HoloLens is it is wireless. All of it is encapsulated inside of that headband. All of these other ones are tethered unless you add on certain accessories which can actually remove that wire. Keep in mind, battery power then becomes a limitation. So, mid-range headsets. We have, from the top left to bottom right, the Oculus Go, which was just announced a couple weeks ago, that sells for $200. That is a 3 degrees of freedom headset, 3DOF. The Samsung Gear VR, which utilizes a Samsung phone, whether that's the Galaxy or the Note, to kind of push through the processing and act as the VR display. the Daydream in the bottom left, which is powered by the Google Pixel, and they just released a small iteration on that at the most recent Google Developers Conference, so for the Pixel 2. And then there's the Mirell AR headset, which is in development and is slated to be released in November. So these price ranges run about $200 for the Oculus Go down to $99 for the Mirell AR. And they end up using some phone, they end up using a phone, or they use some kind of limited processing power inside of that headset to render out your virtual reality experience. And then there's Lowend. There's the Google Cardboard. There is also, which will run you $10 on Amazon, if that. And then there's Magic Window Mode, which is basically using your phone to summon a window into a new world. So there could be a 360-degree video all around me, and then if I use my phone at certain parts, I can open up small segments of that world. So there are some upcoming headsets that are noteworthy. There is the Santa Cruz version that Oculus is developing. It is the same concept as the Oculus Go, except it is a 6 degrees of freedom headset. And that's what this gentleman is wearing over here. We don't have enough information about it. It will be unveiled at the end of next year. Magic Leap is a company that many of you, I'm sure, have heard about. It's raised $2 billion for what? I don't know. But by all accounts, it's an augmented reality headset that projects light onto your retina and is able to both understand the world around you and scan that environment, and then also translate images right there onto your eye. I have not demonstrated it myself. I only know a handful of people who have, and they won't speak about it publicly. So it's a wait and see. And speaking of wait and sees, Apple. Don't know when they're going to get into the game. I don't think they're going to get into the VR game. I think they're going to get into the AR game with glasses, but that's likely 2 to 3 years out. They started dipping their toes into the VR waters at this latest WWDC, their Worldwide Developers Conference, and they have support inside of their software language for high-end GPUs, which are required to run VR, support for external GPUs. My brand new MacBook Pro cannot run VR experiences. Instead, I need about a $3,400 PC to actually run it. And luckily, that's a high-end, but these are brand new, and not many of them have been out for more than a couple of months. So Apple's also supporting it via their iMacs, Final Cut Pro 10. So beyond head tracking and what you see as those visuals, which you can accompany with headphones, in-ear headphones are actually the best, because then you're not able to, because it directs the sound right into your ear without any delays and without any obstruction from outside noise. But beyond that, there are other tools at our disposal that we can use to generate, that we can use to immerse ourselves in virtual environments. So there are hand controllers. This is a motion capture suit. So I'm sure you've seen kind of motion capture videos. This is one that's actually working really well. It's called the Xsense, and we've demoed it and used it. Then you've got this iKinema, which uses a series of Vive trackers. So the HTC Vive was one of the platforms I was mentioning. It uses a series of about 6 trackers and just these 2 base stations to track your position in 3D. And it's very accurate, so we're playing around with that as well. The nice thing about my job is I get to play with all of these fun toys. And then after that, we've got this demo here from Leap Motion. Leap Motion is a fantastic tool that is this small sensor bar that has a great amount of software built into it to track your hands within 3D space, developed by NASA engineers. It had limited applicability from the start. However, once it was paired with VR headsets, you can do an extraordinary amount of things. It's highly accurate. It's the most natural tool you have, instead of having to use a trigger or anything, which is only really good for first-person shooter games. This allows you so much more flexibility, and you can really cater toward whatever your creative experience might be. So beyond this, there are gloves, there are vests, there are low-frequency emitters, subwoofers, we call them butt kickers. There are motion-controlled chairs. So companies that make these are D-Box, positron, and they can be synced to time with your motion inside of a VR headset. Then there's smells and tastes, but those are awkward, just really awkward, and they're messy. And if you're trying to do a longer experience for the public, that's not going to work out well. So VR arcades are coming back. And so it seems like we're at this resurgence of the 1980s, both in terms of what people can do with VR headsets and where they can experience them with VR arcades. So the top left is the IMAX VR Center in Los Angeles. In the upper right is the Void, which has started opening up a number of locations. And they actually have a Ghostbusters experience at Madame Tussauds in New York. They are delivering a Star Wars-based experience that will premiere at Disneyland and Disney World in, I think, end of January. And then Dreamscape is along the bottom. That is a partnership with AMC. So as attendance drops at theaters, AMC is repurposing those spaces to use for VR, and they're partnering with Dreamscape to make that happen. And naturally, I've been speaking about VR as it pertains to entertainment. There are so many applicable use cases for VR. There's sports and job training. There's actually a company that was created by Stanford grads called Striver that's based up here. Derek Belch, Cody Carruthers. He's one of the former employees. There's medicine, and I know that the Stanford Hospital is using that. Real estate is a huge push, and it makes open houses a lot easier and a lot cheaper. Military applications, because there always have been, but frankly, the consumer technology has leapfrogged the military applications, or the military technology, rather. So the military is now going back to the consumer side and asking for help. It's really interesting. Then there's industrial prototyping, and industrial prototyping with primarily car design. A lot of big car companies are using VR to imagine their new models, tear them apart, inspect components, reintegrate them. It's almost like Tony Stark in the Iron Man movies. So here is our show reel. Let it speak for itself. So that's just a small snippet of the pieces that we've done. We've engaged in about 60 projects since the company started about 3.5 years ago. We are about 40 people based out of LA and New York. And what we've done has been extraordinarily challenging, but extremely rewarding. So how we structure ourselves as Here Be Dragons is we are a top-to-bottom experiential studio. So we have creation of original IP, development, sales, production. We have our own camera department. Usually we take existing cameras and we purpose them for a particular project. We don't create our own cameras. We rather repurpose existing ones. We have a post-production department in-house. We have a fine art experiential division. And we have done a huge variety of content. We started as 360 video, and we've shot around the world, 24 countries in 3.5 years, including Australia, Indonesia, Haiti, Pakistan, Czech Republic, Ukraine, South Sudan, Syria, Jordan, Gaza Strip, Poland. The list goes on. So I've overseen about like 5 of those countries, but I didn't actually get to go. Instead, I was the nervous wreck on this side of the ocean. So our clients include Samsung, Oculus, the New York Times, Vice, National Geographic, the major studios in LA, Fox, Paramount, Warner Brothers, GE, Universal Music Group, USA Networks, the Showa Foundation. And we've got a number of others who are joining us, and we're in development on a lot of other projects. So we were the company that produced the piece called The Displaced, which was 3 parallel stories about children who were in war-torn countries, South Sudan, Ukraine, and in Syria. That piece won the Cannes Lion Grand Prix for creativity in 2016, which is a huge accomplishment. And how we came to be is from a commercial inception. I worked in commercials for 3 years. I used to work at a talent agency before that, but I did commercial production for 3 years. There's a commercial production company called Smuggler that has 2 founders. They partnered up with an evangelist in the VR space named Chris Milk. You may or may not have seen some of his TED Talks. He's reappropriated the term empathy machine from Roger to describe VR's transportation transportational element, allowing users to empathize with those who are in significantly more trying circumstances. So this was our piece, and this was one of the widest reaching things that we did. That actually happened just before I joined the company, but it was a great way to get your everyday people, grandmothers, cousins. I still talk to a ton of people who said, well, I tried VR and with the New York Times, and I said, yeah, that was our piece. So that's a lot of fun to say. But beyond being a production company, we do a lot of installations. We have to assume the role of a creative agency because the agencies out there have no idea what they're doing. I've worked with ad agencies a lot in the past. It seems that when it comes to VR, AR, and MR, their ideas of what the capacity is don't truly reflect the potential of the medium. So we have to work in coordination with them to identify what the best use cases are, what the best installations are, how we roll out the strategy. So we become not just a production company, we become a creative agency, a media planning company, location-based entertainment vendor. So these are 2 installations that we've done. This first one on the left was at a mall. We actually had 3 of them simultaneously that happened at the holiday times last year. It was called The Night Before, where you were sitting in a sidecar of Santa's sleigh, and these were motion-controlled chairs that accompanied the experience. We had it at the Grove in Los Angeles, Herald Square in New York, and the Samsung 837 space in New York. Then the photo on the right is a piece that we did, that I produced, called Real Violence. It was for an artist named Jordan Wolfson, and it premiered during the Whitney Biennial in March of this year, ran through July. And we also have another piece that Ann was mentioning that is on exhibit at the Annenberg Space for Photography in Los Angeles, runs through February. I can't recall if it was extended into March. La Musica Havana, and we sent a crew down to Havana for about 3 days of shooting. So we like to do these installations inside museums in more public spaces because it brings about a cultural awareness. The ecosystem online and the home market just doesn't work for VR right now. You have to be your own best promotional agent. You have to market yourself better than anyone else out there. So that's one of the kind of difficult things that we come across in VR, but we realize that there's a lot of work to start at the beginning, but there could be a huge reward in it in terms of creative, in terms of reach, in terms of formulating a new language. So a few other examples that we have of installations. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the Last Goodbye installation, which was designed by David Corrins. He was the production designer who did Hamilton. So he designed this space for us that had a piece that we produced with the Shoah Foundation. The Shoah Foundation being Steven Spielberg's kind of Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. And I can talk more about that piece in a bit. And beneath that, we have the Mr. Robot experience that we had at Comic-Con. We gave a number of headsets away. It was timed to happen simultaneously, so there was a countdown timer, a worldwide release, and it all happened simultaneously with that Comic-Con panel. We had the actors actually right there at Petco Park, and we filled up a good section of it. Then the following year, this past Comic-Con, we did an experience with Legion that featured we did an experience with Legion that featured content that was developed for the Microsoft HoloLens. So that was accompanied by stage actors who were kind of guiding you through the experience. So it wasn't just put this headset on and go. We find that to be really just annoying, and it's lazy, and it doesn't bring people into the experience. It doesn't keep them engaged. So you want to have a good tie-in, a good ramp up to the experience itself, then ramp people down. You don't want to immediately throw a headset off of somebody and say, all right, how did you like it? How did you like it? I actually have a really bad story about a director who went up to a judge and was kind of saying, hey, how'd you like this piece? Immediately after he took off the headset for the Holocaust piece that we produced. And the panelist turned to him and he said, how did I like the Holocaust? So you have to allow people a time to ramp this down and digest what they've just seen, because it's a really compelling experience. So what's the secret sauce? It's the workflow. There's no way that VR can be done unless you have a solid workflow and unless you understand how an experience moves from inception through to production to camera to post-production, and all of these teams are speaking at once. It is not a linear fashion as film is or as television is. There is very much collaboration all along, and if one part is changed, if the camera is changed, it has cascading effects for everything else down the line. Or if the deliverable that you want to finish off with has changed, that affects everything moving up to the front. So nothing is isolated, everything is interconnected. Adaptability is key. So where do we go from here? This is an image of the holodeck that was first introduced in Star Trek, and it portrays the idea of infinite possibilities within a single physical space. So while we're not quite there yet, we have made many incremental steps. So for those of you who are running iOS 11 on iPhone 6s or higher, there is ARKit, which allows for experiences that utilize the sensors inside of it, the IMU, the gyroscope, along with the cameras to identify where you are and to place virtual objects alongside you. So this example seems to be fairly innocuous as a portal, so you can move around to it, to the right, to the left. But where this really gets interesting is when you enter that portal. So then you look to your left, to your right, you see a rainforest, a jungle. You're no longer surrounded by the physical space. So that's an interesting capability. Anybody can just throw up a portal and have it tracked in physical space. But to be able to track a virtual environment that is nestled inside of a physical space is a really hard feat to pull off. The next one is an example of volumetric video. So these individuals are captured on a volumetric stage where you have a camera array all around them, and it's a tremendous amount of data, but what it allows you to do is you have these 3D objects at your disposal. So I can take these guys and have them play basketball on the moon, and these are fully embodied people. They have depth to them. They have light refractions off of them. These are 3D assets that you can get with certain volumetric capture stages. computational firepower has gotten to the point where we can actually utilize that. It's hard to do it over cellular networks given compression issues, but that's a hurdle that's going to be ultimately realized within the next year or two. Then the photo on the upper right is Neurable. It's a company that came out of a doctoral study at the University of Michigan. It tracks brainwaves, and what it does with those brainwaves is identify when you're selecting an object and make it akin to a point and a click. So you can look at an object, it understands where you're looking, it knows when you're selecting something without you having to push a trigger. You can keep your hands in your lap. It's pretty darn cool. And it works extraordinarily well. You don't even have to be looking at the object, but if you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about selecting it, it knows where those brainwaves are triggering from and firing from. And it's quite impressive. It's got 7 sensors on it. They're scaling it down to 4, then ultimately to 2. And they're making it an add-on to an existing VR headset, which is the HTC Vive. So we had them in the office. I came across them at SIGGRAPH, which is kind of it's a convention in LA that looks at computer science and the intersection with visual imagery. And they were demonstrating this, and I was really surprised by how well it worked. Then the last example is integrating things like computer vision and machine learning. So taking computers, having them recognize objects, and then coupling that with augmented reality and mixed reality headsets to create even more immersive experiences to allow you to map out your own route. Imagine Google Maps inside of an AR headset, and you know exactly where to turn, or you know exactly where not to step. So there's other things like AI integration with decision trees, long-form narratives, and then there's improvements on existing technologies like voice and gesture recognition. HoloLens has it built in. There are things inside of the Oculus and also within the Daydream, Samsung Gear VR that have voice recognition built into them. But it's not quite there yet. We're getting there, and everybody's learning what these different APIs are, what these different SDKs are, and trying to find the best way to create an experience that actually utilizes these technologies to their highest potential. I have to keep wowing people. That's what I find working in VR. I always abide by ABD, always be demoing, which is why I have 4 demos here today, because there are market pressures that are impediments to the adoption of VR on a wide scale. I'm not going to say that it's going to reach far market penetration by the end of this year or during the holiday time. It will likely take a couple years. You already have the capacity in your pocket with your smartphone, so this will likely be an incremental step toward a virtual reality realized for the masses. The biggest hurdles with VR being adopted are cost. We saw for a standalone headset $200 and then all the way up to $1,500 and even more, $3,000 for these. And that cost wouldn't be so bad if there was a seminal piece of content that really made everybody wow and connect and understand just how potent this medium was. I think when it comes to film, people didn't realize just how much potential that medium had until Citizen Kane came about. And similarly with VR, it's going to take us some time to figure out how we do that. We have a lot of compelling pieces, a lot of compelling documentaries, but there's not this one piece that everybody can point to and say, this is the start of something truly outstanding, truly unheard of, that it's a paradigm shift when it comes to entertainment. And then lastly, there are production numbers. And how I do my job is I look at the entire scope of a job and realize what the biggest cost drivers are going to be. And we have to estimate our experiences closer to visual effects than we do to regular documentaries. It's not looking at an independent movie and basing a budget around that production workflow. It's instead looking at how much post-production is going to have to be done, how many other vendors are you going to have to reach out to help you with this. And with Dragons, our productions range from $250,000 to 2.5. So we're hoping to get even more on a couple more integrated projects going forward and wider scale projects going forward. But it's hard. There are market leaders who suddenly drop out, and we understand why, but it's not the biggest help to us as we're trying to create this new medium. So we have to remain persistent. Oculus Story Studio, Oculus Story Studio has shuttered, and that was going to be this big building ground for interesting content for people who had an interesting voice and they didn't have to worry about going out and fundraising, but that was closed down. Samsung, not pursuing a platform play any longer. They're doing these hardware plays with the Gear VR, with the mixed reality headset, but ultimately the platforms that they're piggybacking off of are ones created by Oculus or ones created by Microsoft. So they used to be funding a lot more content. They have funded a good amount of our content. We're extraordinarily grateful for that. We've been able to accomplish things that we didn't think possible with those funds, but now that they're out of the market, we have to turn elsewhere. So HTC, they are a hardware play as well. They're not investing in content anymore. And then lastly, Nokia. They're out of the game entirely. They produced the Ozo camera, which was a camera that was capable of doing 360-degree photography, stereoscopy, so 3D imagery in the first 270 degrees, and then in the back 90 was monoscopic. But it was a huge R&D cost for them, and they ultimately couldn't stomach it, so they decided to shut down that division. So that was a fairly new piece of news that happened within the VR industry. We recently had OC4, where Mark Zuckerberg was talking about he was leading off the convention talking about how far he wants VR to reach. He wants 1 billion people in virtual reality. Now note, he didn't specify the time frame. So I would love to get 1 billion people in virtual reality. Do I think it's going to happen in a year? No. 2? No. 5? I hope so, but I'm not counting on it. So, but what I enjoy doing and what I find a lot of satisfaction in is these challenges. No two VR projects are alike. I have to learn a ton about computer imagery, about hardware, about cameras, about optics. I come from a traditional production background, so this is a set, this is a truck, this is a guy who's doing sound. I know how much all of those things cost. But when I'm trying to create a workflow for something that's never been attempted before, and I have to reach out to these big guys and see how we can all sit at the same table and figure out how to pull this off, that's really extraordinary. Being able to call up the head of a visual effects studio or call up a startup here or a hardware vendor based in either China or someone in London or France and just be able to have a conversation with them about what is possible. Not even getting into the numbers, but just what is possible. That is extraordinarily gratifying. So until we reach that $1 billion person in VR threshold, we just have to hang in there. So thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. So I have a series of demos across 4 different headsets. We have the Hololens that a couple people were playing around with. Hololens is a great example of mixed reality. So that has holograms situated around the room. See if you can find them all. For the early people, I was telling them where they were, but I'm going to let people who are in here now put on the headset, explore. To use that headset, all you need to do is loosen the strap in the back by rotating the knob and make sure it fits snugly on the bridge of your nose. Then we also have headsets that are based off of cell phone designs. So we have the Google Daydream here, the Samsung Gear VR here, and then lastly we have the Oculus Rift. The Oculus Rift is showing some content that we've produced. Dispatch and Ghost in the Shell. I'm actually not running Job Simulator right now, but Dispatch and Ghost in the Shell were both pieces that we've done. So I'm happy to kick off some demos for you guys, and in the meantime, how do you want to structure Q&A?
Do you want to do just a few questions?
Sure, absolutely.
So Jaap and Kai, you guys are going to kick it off?
That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Just the first question I did the Hololens demo. Is there a reason why you can only see the objects when you're directly looking at them? Is that like
the field of view is very narrow on these things, so they end up using a tiny projector to project the image onto the lens in front of you, and that's a cost an R&D limitation right now. It will get better in the future iterations, but it's literally just a hardware limitation right now. I think it's probably the coolest headset I've ever come across because everything is encapsulated inside of a single headset. And what it does continuously is it scans the environment around you. So it knows where a table starts. It knows where a wall starts. It knows where a floor is. And it's constantly doing this. Really, really smart tech. Built off of the original Kinect design.
Yeah, so I guess the question I have that carries into it more is since VR and AR is such a novel medium, I guess now. I mean, it's been around for a long time, as you mentioned earlier, but since it's now kicking off again, what are the main problems that human tracking is facing in its daily life? Like, is it trying to figure out better algorithms to present the visual effects that you want to do, or is it the hardware limitations that you deal with, or is it just finding creative people trying to figure out what is the best thing to display in those AR, VR environments?
So the hardest part is getting people to commit to giving us money to produce an experience. Because oftentimes we have to tell them where it's going to be exhibited, what the potential reach might be, and how they get the best bang for their buck. So we have, yeah, that's really, truly, and honestly the hardest part. It's VR for PR. That's a term that's been around for a long time, but it's really the case where you need to find wealthy benefactors to fund these projects that are pushing the technology forward.
Can you talk a little bit about the advertising space?
Yeah.
To follow up to that, I mean, is it taking on faster in the installations, in advertising, in documentaries? Where's the traction?
With advertising, it seems to be in AR more than anything else, because there people understand how the advertising is integrated. With virtual reality, it has to be crafted around a narrative for people to actually believe it. But with AR, you can throw in a traditional banner, you can brand an object. If I want to play with a basketball in AR, somebody can brand it with Spalding, if it's Spalding who's sponsoring the piece. Or if I'm Boeing, I can do AR and kind of look up into the sky and see all different types of Boeing jets flying to and from. So it's a lot easier to understand it that way, and also when they understand, they're looking for reach. So as much as viewership on television is declining, they still want millions of people to be able to see this. So if we tell them that everybody has ARKit installed on their cell phone if they have the latest operating system, or AR Core if you're rocking a Pixel or an Android, then they can understand a bit more. But even then, you need to compel people to be able to experience this by downloading an app. Do it moving forward is to have it integrated inside of the browser. So WebVR, which is a standard that is being pushed by. So you don't want to have to keep clicking into your experience. You want to make it as easy for them as possible. And I admit that that's a problem I face when dealing with these demos. It's not easy for people to immediately put it on and understand what to do. You need to make it so simple, seamless.
So you guys have done work with the New York Times several times.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, what has been the biggest benefit for them? Is it just the idea that they're learning a lot through this new medium? Storytelling, or what keeps bringing them back?
I think for them, it's being able to show how they're not just okay to stay within their regular space. They are pushing forward in more interactive mediums. They are willing to bring the story to you without affecting its outcome. So for them, I think it shows how in touch they are with their audience, or that they're also at the forefront of this cutting-edge technology. And ultimately, these are really compelling stories that they're putting out. So if it's looking at immigrants or refugees, or they've done some more recent pieces since they actually brought a lot of that production functionality in-house with embedded journalists inside of military convoys. They just want to be able to put people into that story. Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
I'm curious, since you mentioned about like how your how the creators would consider like the curriculum and their change because of the platform, and how do you like what do you think about bringing more creators like maybe from the traditional field to your platform? How is there direction or thoughts you have on bringing?
Can you repeat that last part just a little bit louder?
How do you go about bringing more people to create like more VR?
I don't think the problem is actually like how much content is being created. I think the problem is how many people are able to see it. So we end up speaking with a lot of people from more traditional backgrounds, from film, from television, and seeing if they are able to craft a story and a narrative that fits within VR or AR. But I don't think the problem is with the creators. I simply think it's with the audience. So even if you continue to bring creators and creators in, if there's no audience, what's the point?
I'm just curious about your views on this physical element of the mask itself. I mean, a lot of people, like you mentioned, probably won't do this because it's just the whole experience of the mask doesn't work that well, or they feel whatever reason they don't like it. What do you think about that? Does it have to be a new technology that are getting less intrusive on people, basically? To
Yes.
Get the big, well, is that going to
Absolutely.
way forward?
Yeah, it's definitely in the cards as a lot of this technology is becoming more miniaturized. It's been helped along by advancements in cell phone technology. So, but it has to be very seamless. There is still a stigma associated with wearing a headset, but I think if the experience is compelling enough and it feels light enough where people can end up wearing it for a half hour and not even realize that it's on their head, that's going to be the key turning point for people to adopt it widely. I was showing the Mirell AR headset where you just have your phone slide into it. It's super light, it's super easy. I think that is a big jumping off point for AR and MR going forward. It has to be light, it has to be unobtrusive. But with this, look, I don't mind the obtrusiveness given how much benefit I get from the tech itself, but I also have a greater penchant for tech than most people.
So go ahead, Ali.
I was just going to ask that. It feels like people are much more comfortable doing AR through like their cell phones and things like that. Do you see that the future might be that people take that half step into something like Pokemon Go and whatnot and sort of stop there and never make it all the way to VR, or is that not a concern that you have?
We want people to feel as comfortable as possible with AR, and then when they realize that VR incorporates a lot of AR components, but does it in an environment that is all your own creation, where you have full interactive abilities, I think that's going to be an easier sell than trying to just have them throw on a headset and tell them exactly what they're going to do. But Pokemon Go was a great start, I think. But I do think it's a bit of a false flag for AR because it places these Pokemons in your view, but it doesn't actually make them contextually aware of their surroundings. So it's cool to see them realized inside of a park or inside of your apartment, but I much prefer a mixed reality environment where I can see these things interacting. So if I have a Pokemon who is breathing fire onto grass, I want to see that grass go up in flames. I want to see a fireball that chars a table nearby. I want to know that these things that I'm interacting with have reciprocal effects on the world around me.
So who has not tried this? Okay. So that's one, okay.
So
where you can see the rack down here in the corner. And a cat
hamster and hamster.
Right, a cat on your table.
So this is the Samsung gear. I'll let whomever would like come up and take a look.
So why don't you guys come up, we'll rotate these around, but tell them what they'll see.
Yeah, so in here, I think the piece that I have queued up, let's see, so there are a couple pieces. If you look to your left and to your right, we have our reel, we have the click effect, which is a piece we did with the New York Times that is all underwater, which is really cool. We have a piece we did for the latest season of 24 that was shot with high-end actors, high-end special effects, explosions, things like that. We also have, what else? One Republic, which was a music video. VR music videos actually work really well, so I encourage you to take a look at that. And then Muse Revolt was also another music video. So to use this headset, just put it over your face And then this is a trackpad right here along the side. So if you look inside of this headset, you will see a round circle as your cursor. And then once you've selected the piece of content that you want to watch, go ahead and tap on that touchpad right here.
So let me pass that one around, and we'll start this one
Yep.
over.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. Right. This is why I love this thing. It's really cool. Cool. Now everything's back now.
Okay, next up.
Next up, this is the Google Pixel. So with Google Daydream. So you end up using this controller to select the items on the screen in front of you. The piece Pearl is queued up in here. That's the animated piece I was talking about earlier, really compelling. Also, when you're wearing these headsets, feel free to sit in a chair that swivels all the way around so that you can move freely without feeling confined to a certain area. Swivel chairs are the biggest thing, I think. If VR really takes off, invest in swivel chairs. So whoever wants to put it on, it's all queued up.
Pass this one down here.
And then lastly, I have the Oculus Rift. This is one of the higher end headsets. We have the Ghost in the Shell experience. Go for it. These are the Oculus Touch controllers. So put them naturally. These are the sensors that track your position within 3D space. So, and in the meantime, happy to answer any and all other questions about what we do, how do we do it, why do we do it, and where we see ourselves in the next year, 2 years.